Welcome to the Relationship Series podcast. My name is Ankush Jain, and each episode I'll be speaking to a different state of mind expert on the subject of relationships. Enjoy. Welcome to the Relationship Series. I'm excited because this is actually episode 20, so it feels like a little bit of a milestone. And this week I'm joined by Judith Sedgeman, who's been teaching the principles behind state of mind for over 3 decades. And a lot of that has been with clients individually as well as with organisations. And relationships are really a key topic in the work that she does. So I'm really looking forward to this interview. Welcome, Judith.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you.
I'm glad that we're finally doing this for the listeners. We've had a few glitches, but we finally made it. So let's kind of see what comes up. Before we start, Judith, I'd love you in your own words just to tell our listeners a little bit about you and the work you've done specifically around relationships over the last 3 decades. If you can encapsulate that at all.
I can encapsulate it. I think yes. I actually got involved in the principles while I was running a medical practice management business that I started years ago. And one of my clients was Bill Pettit, who many people in the principles community know very well. Dr. Bill Pettit, who's a psychiatrist, who is a premier teacher of the principles, although he was fairly new to it then too. So. And one of the things that I noticed immediately about his practice compared to all the other physicians that I was working with was that he, number one, got along with everybody. And number two, he seemed very happy most of the time. In other words, he engaged with patients, staff, colleagues, hospitals, and none of the work that he wanted done had anything to do with conflict. Almost all my other clients came to me because they were in some kind of conflict. He came because he really needed help with business management and was very happy to admit it and wasn't at all egotistical about it. So as I started to work with his practice, which was strictly business, we're going to do billing and collections and receivables and office management, he said to me, I really hate for you to get involved in my practice if you don't, really understand what I do, because it is different. So I started sitting in on groups that he was doing for his patients, friends, and families, because so many people that he was treating from the standpoint of the principles were having very powerful recoveries from years of stress, distress, dysfunction, mental illness, hospitalizations, and so on. And quite often it was mystifying and a little frightening to the people in their lives. And so he would have these public groups where they could bring the people closest to them, and he would explain what it was that had been at the heart of this change in their loved one. And my life started to change. I myself really got a whole new vision for what was possible in business, primarily because that's what I was in. I was in business, and while I got into the mental health aspect of it later, at that time all I could see was, if my other clients understood this, and if I understood it, especially me, it would be very much less stressful. And my business was extremely stressful in my mind. So that's really how I got started. I realized that there was a better way to get along with people, that there was an easier way to do business, that you could be in a disagreement with someone without it ever getting unpleasant, or without anybody having to raise their voice, or just handle things. And that graceful, easy, happy way of going about life was extremely appealing to me, because I was working in a very fast-paced, aggressive, competitive, nasty world. And so that, basically that's how I got intrigued. But then as I sat through his groups, my life started to change dramatically. And, it's really funny because before I met Bill, I actually was hoping to get out of my business. I'd started it and it was very successful and I hated it because it was unbelievably high pressure. And after nothing changed except me, let's put it that way. I started sitting in on Bill's groups and I changed. And as I changed, everything around me looked different. So my clients were still the same people. They were still doing the same things. They were still making the same dysfunctional phone calls. They were still arguing with hospital administrators. But my whole way of approaching it was just changing dramatically. And as I changed, my clients began to come around. They began to be attracted to the idea that, well, maybe I should call Judy before I yell at the hospital administrator. And so I started doing work with my clients around state of mind instead of just around their numbers and their business dealings. And that was the beginning for me. And it's been a long journey since then. I ended up selling my business ultimately and moving to LaConner, working with the Pranskys for 9 years. I was an associate at Pransky and Associates, and then I left there because I was recruited to go to West Virginia University School of Medicine, where I taught in the public health program for 15 years. So, and now I'm back in Florida. I'm still an adjunct professor at West Virginia University School of Medicine, but I'm mostly doing seminars, retreats, individual coaching and mentoring, and seeing clients at the Women's Resource Center in Bradenton, which is really kind of charity, and just staying committed to the principles. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's quite a varied career, and I think like many of the people that I've interviewed on this series, that it's amazing how people's careers have gone, and I'm guessing you didn't expect that when you first started looking.
No.
at these principles.
No, I really thought I was just going to, be a little happier, but I didn't realize. I mean, I got a very big vision for what was really possible and how what a huge agency of change these principles are for the world over time, and that's what drew me to just get out of the healthcare. I mean, I was pretty committed to my business. Obviously, that was my thing, but I was more committed to becoming a student of life and really understanding at the deepest level I could how to help people this way. And the first thing I understood is that everything that you can do with and for other people is very dependent on what you've seen for yourself. So I remember the first time I was ever going to give it a shot, try my wings at doing a little public program on the three principles when I was first working with Bill Pettit. I think I'd probably been, trying to learn from him for about a year. And it was with a Chamber of Commerce group. It was just, a little business group. And I got kind of, when I started thinking about it, it seems silly to me now, but I was kind of getting nervous about, oh my gosh, this is so different, and how are these people going to respond and everything, and I don't know enough, and all the things, the insecure thinking that we all do. And I remember Bill saying, you know what you know, and whatever's helped you, it's a different direction than you were going before, and if you can point in that direction, you're going to help people. And then I really saw the incremental nature of our own learning, that the more we reach out to people, the more we share, the more we learn from that experience, but also that everything that any of us does, no matter where we are in our journey, no matter how early it is in the journey, if we're pointing in the direction of the inside-out world and quietude and calm and stillness inside, we're helping people to look in a different way than they've been looking. So it's, maybe some people at the very beginning of their, and certainly all of us at the very beginning of our involvement in the principles, have much less to say than they do later on, and much less to, still a lot to learn as we have for the rest of our lives. But anything is better than nothing if you're helping people to look in the right direction. So that's kind of how I got started. And of course, now it seems silly because I've done seminars and trainings all over the world, and I've been a consultant to a lot of major corporations, and mostly working on how people are working together.
So I'd love to hear what some of the key takeaways or some of the key things that you share with people in business, because I find that, and everyone's got their own area, but some people might be listening to this and saying, well, I know how to get on with my friends and I know how to get on with my family, but businesses, that's different, right? Like there's something unique about that. And I'd love your thoughts on what you share in that
here's what's really funny is I guess a lot of people do think that. A lot of people, kind of make a big deal about business being different, but business is just a group of people working together to accomplish something. It's, so I don't see any difference between a Fortune 500 corporation and a civic group. It's a bunch of people that are trying to come together and arrive at some common way to reach a goal. And, it can get complicated if your goal is complicated, but it's still people trying to work with other people. And if you can't do that, you're kind of like the whole game is up. So it doesn't really matter. I always told my clients, it really doesn't matter how perfect your plan is if your attitude and your state of mind is off. You can't execute a perfect plan from an imperfect state of mind. You just can't. And so if you're nasty and controlling and mean-spirited and manipulative and greedy and argumentative and all those things, that's going to affect how everything works out because people don't respond well to that. So I see the leader, business leaders, their primary responsibility is to really change the state of mind of their work groups. And then when the state of mind of the work groups change, the work groups know what to do. They wouldn't be in the business if they didn't understand it. So a lot of people say, well, I don't know how I could ever go work for like a steel corporation or something because I don't understand that at all. But the thing is, you understand people and they understand their business. They're just having a hard time accessing and using that understanding to succeed. So when we work with business, we're really working with the human factor, not with the details of their particular business. And I realized that even doing the medical practice management thing, I used to be very frustrated because I would do these, we used to do something called practice analysis. So somebody would call me and they'd say, I don't understand what's happening. I'm losing patients and I'm losing money or whatever. And we would go in and I had, myself and an accountant and an expert medical code and biller, and which wouldn't mean anything to people in Europe because you all have health care, but we have to bill insurance. And and I'd go in and do this very complicated, careful business analysis. And I always found the problem. Because we were very good at what we did. And we would write this report and present it to the clients, and they'd be so impressed, and they would be happy to pay us for the report. And we would make recommendations. And I used to say never more than 10, but we would make recommendations and spread them on a timeline, do this first, then do this. And then I'd go back and check on the clients, and they hadn't done any of it. Even though at the time we presented it to them, they loved it. And they thought, yeah, that's it. That's the problem. That's exactly what we have to fix. And I was baffled by that because they didn't blame me. They were happy to pay me. They would bring me back in to look at it again. But they were incapable of changing. And that's the part I didn't understand. And I'm thinking how long, that's why it was so frustrating, is how long would you do this? And you tell people the obvious and they don't do it. It's like telling your children, pick up your room, And then all of a sudden when I saw state of mind for what it was, and I saw the principles, and I saw that we were just thinking about circumstances instead of understanding ourselves, I realized why they couldn't execute the plan, because it wasn't their plan, it was my plan. So it came from my inspiration and my company's thinking. And it sounded really good to them. It made sense to them when they were listening to it, but it didn't come from them. It It wasn't their creative input. So the first change that happened for me when I was working with these clients was, instead of doing a practice evaluation and presenting them this document and all these instructions, I would start doing kind of an inquiry. So I'd go in there and we'd evaluate the practice, and we knew what was the problem, right? But instead of going in there and telling them what the problem was, I would, number one, address the state of mind first, so we would have these very pleasant meetings, and I'd make sure that there was rapport and that we were all kind of relaxed and everybody was cordial and listening to each other. And I didn't try to meet with them on the fly as they were running from the emergency room to the fourth floor and that kind of thing. And then we would ask them, well, have you really, have you ever inquired about this or that? Or do you notice that your biller is very stressed out and nervous? Or have you noticed this or have you noticed that? And they would start having insights. And inevitably, they would come to the same conclusion that we came to, but then they would act on it because it was theirs. It belonged to them. It came from within them. And all we were doing was pointing in the direction of reflective, thoughtful, quiet inquiry. And, that was even before I could explain to them why that worked. But that was my first realization that, when you're at peace within yourself and you're reflective and quiet, everybody sees the obvious. It just becomes clear what's going on. And how people miss it is they're so distracted by their own thinking, or they're so caught up in their own mental frenzy that they just don't notice anything. So that was a step. But then I realized what's really important is to teach them how that works so they can do it without me. They shouldn't need to have a meeting with me to calm down, and I was kind of putting myself out of business, which is what we do. And so that's when I started saying, I've got to switch from being their business advisor to being their kind of coach. Their you don't want to say spiritual advisor, because in business that's weird, but it's really what it was. It's reaching people at a very deep level and helping them to see for themselves what's going on in their own human psychology and the people around them. So that's really, it's so obvious to me now when I look at it that the relationship we each have with ourselves determines the relationship we can have with other people. And that depends on our understanding of our own thinking and our ability to see when we're getting off track and go back to quietude. And when people come to a realization about that, people are much more compassionate and kind and patient and decent in their dealings with each other. And creativity flourishes in that environment.
So could you share for the listeners some of the things that you might share with businesses that help make you redundant, if you like? What are the things that you shared with them that helped them? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening would love to have a clearer state of mind, love to be in that better place.
Well, one of the things that one thing that happened when I started working with big corporations, and I wasn't anymore doing the healthcare business, but I was working with just pretty much anybody. I started working on the basis of, I'm not going to quote you a fee. So we're going to talk about value. We're not going to talk about the fee. Now, a lot of people would never do this, and I understand that, but you get gutsy as you get more certain. And I would say, so if you pay my expenses and you put me up, and let me eat decent food, and nothing fancy, but just I don't want to be eating fast food for a week while I'm working with your people. We'll talk about what you want to pay for what happened afterwards, and you can send me a check for what it was worth to you. Well, so that takes people off the hook, because you're not saying, it's going to be $15,000 or whatever it's going to be. You're saying it's going to be up to you. And that's kind of like the first step in them realizing that life is volitional. They can take my deal or not. They can put me up or not. They can include me in their strategic planning or not, and they can pay me or not. And then I would sit down and say, so we have to arrive at objectives. So because how you will determine whether you're going to pay me or not is whether these objectives are met. But I'm not going to try to set your sales numbers, your production numbers, your hiring and firing. I'm going to talk about a different kind of objective. So then I would do the what ifs, and the what ifs. What if you only met when it was necessary to meet? Various teams only met when there was something to talk about. What if people were able to solve the problem that they brought to the meeting at that meeting, instead of having 18 endless meetings in which they circled the problem and never got to the end of that question? What if people who were considered problematic worked well with people? What if they were able to integrate back into their work group and be at peace and at ease with people? And this is the kind of goal we set. Well, they would say that's impossible. We've had this. We have this engineer. He's been a problem for years because he's just a jerk. But he's so smart, and we really need to keep him. But everybody hates him, and so I'm going like, all right. Now, what if you could cut down on the amount of time that people spend complaining about each other, and 100% of their work time was actually work? Because when you look at the average corporation, when you see a lot of overtime, I used to look at that. I always looked at their overtime numbers. Because when you see a lot of overtime in a company that's run by pretty intelligent people that know how to structure it, then that means that people are wasting their time at work and they don't know it. That if they were actually doing their job from the time they got to work until they left, they would finish. But, how much of their time is spent whining, complaining, writing unnecessary negative memos, documenting how pissed off they are for one reason or another, or what, or keeping track of people they don't like. There's so many counterproductive things that people do with their time and their energy, and they don't even realize that that's an inappropriate use of the workday. Why would you do that? So what if people just worked all day and then went home and had a nice life? Well, for the most part, leaders are very attracted to that vision, even though they don't believe in it. But since they don't have to pay me unless it happens, there's no loss for them. It's like, what's the worst case? I'll come and I'm not that unpleasant a person to spend time with, and nothing will happen, and you will have put me up in a hotel for a few days. Or something amazing might happen in your company. Well, that's a tough deal not to take. I have to say that very few people ever said, no, I'm not going to do that. But even though they went into it with a certain degree of skepticism, is that really possible? I mean, can you change the behaviors of people? Because their way of changing behavior up until that time, of course, was to try to put out new instructions. Like HR would send out a memo, we will no longer argue in the halls. It's like, it's great. Everybody goes in the bathroom and argues. I mean, it's like, but so people are always trying to change behavior from the outside in by making more rules or changing the rules or, that kind of thing, or instructing supervisors how to, instruct other people. And I was saying, no, people will change within themselves. You will have fewer rules, and people will self-regulate once they discover that they can. And people would rather feel better. I mean, nobody's going to disagree that people would rather feel better if they had a choice. Nobody really wants to be negative and upset. So that's how I would start. I would start by, selling them on the idea that, number one, they can achieve a sustainable change in the way people interact with each other without a lot of time. And number two, they can decide if that's valuable to them after they see what happens. And I worked with one company one time where their sales doubled the year after I had met with their management team at their retreat. So the guy kept sending me checks. It's like he'd say, well, actually it's doing even better than I thought. So here's a little bonus. And I never saw them again. I mean, I went to a week-long thing with them, and that was it. So I think we have to realize, first of all, there's plenty of troubled people in the world. We don't have to attach ourselves to any client and stick with them and keep seeing them over and over and over again. I mean, obviously, if it's a huge corporation, you might spend years just visiting everybody, making sure you've seen everybody. But, for the most part, when people change, they change. And after they've changed, they work with each other differently, and then they hire differently, and they train differently, and people see each other differently, and they do better.
You mentioned the words self-regulate, and you said when people realize that they can self-regulate, it changes the way they approach business. So what sort of things would you share with these clients of yours that would show them that they can self-regulate? Because again, people listening sometimes may think that they don't have a choice, that they are, it's Bob that is very annoying and making me feel upset at work.
Well, self-regulation is really a way of saying you raise the bar on your own state of mind. I would ask people, how cheaply are you willing to give away your state of mind? The one thing that you have is your own clarity, your own wisdom, your own peace of mind, your own capacity to create and innovate and develop, and you can give it away or you don't have to. And when you find out I don't have to, you're less inclined to do it, because people are happier when they're in a creative and productive state. So when you say self-regulate, it's almost like, the things, for example, before I understood the principles and when I thought the world was really affecting me. So, I blamed everything that was happening on my aggravating clients, and how they were inconsiderate and they called me at all hours. It never occurred to me to turn my phone off. It's like, and I had all these, I had a big story that I was telling myself about all the stuff out there in the world that made my life very, very difficult and stressful. And when I didn't have that story anymore, when it was like, I'm making it, so it's going to be as difficult or as stressful as I'm willing for it to be. You change your standards internally for what's acceptable, Like, why would I lose my temper? It's who's going to suffer from that? It's me, What in the long scheme of things, on my deathbed, am I going to remember that Joe insulted me at a meeting? Who cares? You just get to the so what period where you just think, there's really nothing that goes on in the world of work, which is just a game, that's so important that I should give away my peace of mind and my goodwill and my happiness. So self-regulation is just a natural byproduct of seeing yourself as the creator of your own experience. You start going like, well, if I'm making it up, why the hell should I make up something horrible? It doesn't make any sense. So that's really what it is.
Yeah, it's remind me of when I first started learning about these principles, and I was working in a large business. And in the team, I delivered a training, and the only thing we did was when we saw someone else go into a low state of mind in terms of get caught up in their head, not be in a good place, we just used to smile at each other and go, where's your state of mind at the moment? And we were almost doing it to tease each other, if you like, and it just snapped people right back up. And that's kind of what I hear you're saying. Yeah,
except that it's not so much like I usually tell people that other people's state of mind is none of their business. In other words, like I have, my experience has been that if I'm in a meeting, we might have a tone monitor. So I will take the person with the deepest understanding and the most sort of stable, calm attitude, and say, we have to agree in advance. We have a ground rule for this meeting, and what we're going to do is we're going to agree in advance that when the tone monitor says take a break, we take a break. We don't ask why, we take a break. And it doesn't take more than 2 thoughts for people to change, so taking a break could just be getting up, stretching, looking out the window for a minute, walking around the table, sitting back down. So, so in a structured setting, I think you can do that without pointing anybody out or without, kind of like trying to make a certain person think about their state of mind. That you can say, let's take a quick break, and then resume. And it always changes, when you do that, the character of the discussion changes. So, but in real life, like in husbands and wives and colleagues and peers and partners and business associates, people don't like it very much when somebody assumes I'm in a better state of mind than you are, and you better clean up act. It's kind of like that doesn't necessarily, it would with your friends and colleagues, you can kind of have kind of a mutual way of we're going to just do, and it works. Because as soon as a person realizes what they're doing, they will change. But I found that it's better to generalize in every situation, to generalize to the point where what I'm really doing is understanding that at that moment, that person is caught up in something, and if I give them a little mental break, they'll be fine. I don't have to say anything. You know what I mean? You know what I mean by that? So just say, let's drop this for a minute. Let's talk about something else, or let's go get some coffee, or that kind of thing. And I think that the miraculous thing about understanding thought is that you really are one thought away from a whole different feeling. So if a person is momentarily distracted from their own negativity, they get over it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure a lot of people. Well, I'm certainly sitting here thinking that's just common sense. I can see that playing out in so many situations. So I've got one more question for you, which is almost kind of like a general one. Is if there was one thing that you wanted people to take away from this, so ordinary people who are listening to this, looking for better relationships, and we've talked a lot about business, so maybe it's in a business context. What's the one thing you'd want people to take away from this interview?
I think the one thing that I'd want people to take away is that you got to take care of yourself. That this work is always the health of the helper, and the most important relationship you have is with yourself. Because when you're really very much at peace within yourself, and that means being at peace when you're out of sorts. I mean, you have to just understand. Sometimes I'm going to be out of sorts, but I recognize it and I don't act on it. That's the difference. The difference between us and people think, oh, well, you're going to be some kind of like skipping around nirvana if you get the principles. No, it's just that you don't take yourself seriously. So the more you see the game of life, the more you see how we're creating our reality, the more you see what Sid used to call the cosmic joke. Is we make it up and then we live in it as though somebody else dumped it on us. That, the more you see that, the more peace you have within yourself. And when you have peace within yourself, you have every resource available to you to get along with others. You understand them, and you have a much larger forgiveness factor because, you can look at people that are acting out and just doing dumb stuff and go, yay, there, but for the grace of God go I. I've been there too. I know what that is. It's just like a little thought storm. It'll pass.
Well, thanks, Judith. We've run out of time now, so I've really enjoyed the interview today, and we covered so much. For people who are listening to this that might want to get in contact with you, learn more about you, how might they do that? What's the best way?
Well, I would say the best way is to go to my website, which is www.3principles, the word 3, a dash, and principles.com. And if they go to www.3principles.com, they will be able to email me or contact me. There's contact forms, and there's also all sorts of free downloadable material on the site. There's things that you can find that might or might not be helpful. So I'd love for people to do that, and and thank you very much for asking.
No problem. And I guess people can get in contact with you via email and Skype, and they don't need to be based in the USA at all.
Oh, not at all. No, I do work all over the world. So yeah, mostly from my own den, right where I'm sitting now. Because I take advantage of. I do a lot of webinars and Skype and email and phone calls. Yeah.
Excellent. For people who want to know more about myself, they can do that via my website, which is www.ankushjain.co.uk. On Facebook, which is facebook.com/AnkushJain Ltd, and at Twitter, which is @AnkushKJain. All of the podcasts are available on iTunes and on any of those resources. Thanks once again, Judith, and I look forward to speaking to the listeners next time.
Great. You're very welcome. Take care.
Thanks. This was the Relationship Series podcast. If you like this episode, please share it and leave us your feedback online. Thanks for listening.